Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 5 ways to fix Ultimate Infestation. Now the first question you should be asking is, why does Ultimate Infestation need a fix? For some of you that'll probably seem rather obvious if you've been playing a ton of ranked Hearthstone lately, but for others of you, if you're playing Ultimate Infestation or maybe don't realize or don't feel like it's all that problematic of a card, I do want to offer an explanation for why I think it is a destructive card in Hearthstone right now. And to do that, the first thing I want to do is just head into the data, and then I'll also explain why I think we can interpret that data so negatively, and then finally, of course, I'll propose my suggestions for how we actually fix this card and make it less problematic. So here's some data from hsreplay.net, which, if you guys don't know, is a great resource for exactly things like this to determine card win rates and deck win rates and all kinds of other stuff. And what I've done here is pulled up some data that shows you the 10 cards in Hearthstone in the Frozen Throne meta that have the highest win rate when they're played. So Archmage Antonidas has the highest win rate when he's played. Ultimate Infestation comes down there in the number 7 spot. But you'll notice something about this list. Every other card on this list is either a distinct finisher style card that you only play when you're in a position to win the game. So you'll see, for instance, Antonidas and the Molten Reflection Exodia Mage combo cards. You'll see Bloodlust, you'll see Auction Master Beardo, which you only play in Exodia Paladin. So these are cards that you would expect to have super high win rates because you only play them when you're winning the game. And, you know, other than that, it's burst damage like Pyroblast and Mind Blast and Fireball. And then Raza and Velen are in the combo of Shadow Reaper Anduin as well, so more game-winning cards. But the one card there that stands out is Ultimate Infestation. It's not a finisher style card, it's not a burst damage kind of card, it's just a regular old value card. The second thing that stands out, you'll notice, is the percentage of decks that it's currently played in is way higher than every other card on this list. It's 16.1% of decks for Ultimate Infestation. The next highest card on that list is Raza at 8.8, which is probably a part of another problematic deck with Shadow Reaper Anduin, so maybe that one needs some adjustments as well. But that's just way too many decks running Ultimate Infestation, which is a really good sign that people have recognized how powerful it is and are putting it in every version of Druid, and of course a ton of people are also playing Druid right now. So you can see this card is a bit of an odd man out. It doesn't fit up with all these other cards. It's way too strong. It's winning far too many games as just a regular card. So I think the question you have to ask is, why is Ultimate Infestation so strong in that environment? And I think really part of this problem can be traced back to the fact that Druid has access to such powerful ramp cards. You know, the Wild Growth, the Jade Blossoms, the Nourishes, and of course the Innervates as well. And typically that really powerful mechanic of ramping your mana forward and, you know, accelerating your mana to really high mana totals very early in the game has always been balanced by the fact that you basically always sacrificed card advantage to do that. You give up a card draw because you had to draw that Innervate, right? And you're just using it for tempo or acceleration. You're not using the actual card as a resource on the board or some sort of direct influence on the game. So in the past, Druid would essentially, if you ramped super hard, you'd be reliant on getting a ton of card draw, and usually very inefficient card draw, in order to sort of make up for that risk of running all those ramp cards. And that's really captured very well in the card Nourish, where traditionally you have to choose, you either ramp or you draw cards. You don't get to do both. But Ultimate Infestation has essentially given that ramp style of play, the super aggressive ramp, it's given it a release valve where you say, hey, even if I go super heavy ramp, I have a very powerful spell that can directly impact the board, that can swing things in my favor because I can remove something and play a minion. And guess what? On top of that, I can actually refill my hand. So there's very little downside to actually ramping my mana because I'm getting all the cards back anyway. I'm going to draw 5 cards with this insanely powerful spell. And if you look at Ultimate Infestation, it actually has an incredibly high mulligan win rate. I didn't show that in the data, but if you look at it, it has something like a 65% win rate when it's kept in your opening hand, or when you get it in your opening hand, which is ridiculous. That just goes to show you that knowing that it's there and it's going to allow you to swing the game as long as you hit all those ramp cards is incredibly powerful and removes all of the downside, all of the risk versus reward calculations that Druid actually had to make in the past. So it's basically a card with zero downside, incredible upside that counters the one weakness of a class and a mechanic that has always been really, really on the edge of being super duper powerful with Ramp Druid. So Ultimate Infestation is basically exactly what they needed to remove all the downsides and gain a bunch of upsides in the process. So now the question is, how do you fix it? How do you make Ultimate Infestation better? And yes, some of these suggestions I'm about to make are going to sound like nerfs because they are nerfs. I think the card is too good. That doesn't mean I want to make it unplayable. I think there are ways to tone it down just a little bit, you know, take 10, 15, 20% of its value out of the equation, and then it still becomes a playable card that works for Druid. It has great flavor. It all fits together. It's just not quite so dominant, so it makes the class a little weaker overall because Druid right now is in a fantastic spot. So let's go ahead and jump into these 5 fixes for Ultimate Infestation. This is a pretty simple one, but, you know, if you talk about the fact that you can refill your hand so consistently as the strong point of Ultimate Infestation, why don't we just dial back on that a little bit, right? Instead of giving the Druid 5 cards, give them 3 cards. And that's a subtle change, right? It's still 3 cards. That's a lot of cards to draw in a single spell, especially when you're also getting, you know, direct damage and a minion on the board. That's still a very, very powerful card. But the difference between 3 cards and 5 cards can mean a lot in a game. You know, for instance, there's the chance that they only draw 3 sort of mid to low impact cards, and they could use all of those in the next turn. You know, maybe it's two Wraths and a Swipe or something like that, or 2 Wraths and a Wild Growth, and they just don't have a lot of ways to utilize those. Instead of, you know, getting another extra minion or 2 in the 2nd or the 4th and 5th card, I should say, in the 2 remaining cards that you'd normally draw. So that gives the opposing player and the opposing deck essentially maybe another turn or 2 to continue to pick up steam and play some big minions and pressure the Druid and put them behind on the board more significantly than they might if they draw the full 5 cards. So it just pulls back on that resource gain a little bit, gives everybody else time to work and time to apply pressure, which is really the one thing Druids can't handle is big boards of big minions. So if they're a little bit slower in responding to that and just a card or 2 at a time, you'd be surprised how big of an impact that can actually have. So this would make Ultimate Infestation still a really good card, one of the best cards of the game probably still, but would occasionally cost the Druid games that they would win right now. Because 5 cards, it's just you get such a breadth and such an array of stuff that you tend to get removal, you tend to get a minion, so you do have a perfect answer for the next turn. And this would reduce the likelihood that that occurs. So my next suggestion is really another pretty simple one, and I'd say a fairly elegant tweak, and that is just to set all of the numbers on Ultimate Infestation to 4 instead of 5. So they get 1 less card, they get a weaker minion on the board, and I think the most important change here is that they only get to do 4 damage instead of 5 damage, because if you look in Hearthstone, 5 damage is really a pretty magic number. A lot of minions have 5 health, so this just means that sometimes it doesn't line up quite as well as it would have as far as removing something of your opponent's. The minion you get is a little bit easier for everybody else to deal with. You do get 1 less card to draw. The armor difference is nothing important, but, you know, just it's basically a 20% straight nerf, and the card is really, really powerful right now. It would still be a strong card, be fine. It just wouldn't be quite so dominant and quite so oppressive. And I think it'd be a little bit more awkward to use, so there wouldn't always be those perfect turns for the Druid to take where they have the exact answer with Ultimate Infestation. So my next suggestion is one that I think would be a very, very minor nerf, but would of course still negatively impact the quality of the card, and that's that the Druid should actually lose 5 health when they cast Ultimate Infestation, not gain 5 armor, because as I mentioned, there's really no downsides to casting Ultimate Infestation, so this just adds a little extra risk into the equation when you cast it. So suddenly it gets a lot worse against, you know, decks with burst damage or super hyper aggressive decks. It gives you a little less time to play a card like this, because, you know, 10 mana cards traditionally are really slow, but with Ultimate Infestation, it's not slow at all. You get to play the board, you get some defensive utility, not to mention all the cards. So this means that it's a little slower in the regard that you can't play it against a board full of stuff lest you kill yourself. There might even be instances you literally can't play it without killing yourself. So once again, just another tweak that reduces the number of times and the array of board states that would make this a super good card to play. And if you can just dial back on that number a little bit where the card becomes more awkward 1 out of 10 turns, suddenly that's 1 out of 10 games that this does not become a game-winning card, and that reduces Druid's win rate a little bit into a level that feels a lot more natural and more balanced. So up next is another interesting suggestion here, and this is that to cast Ultimate Infestation, the Druid has to give up 2 mana crystals. So essentially this becomes an anti-ramp style of punishment, or another downside to casting Ultimate Infestation. And it's important that you couldn't just give up one mana crystal, because if you cast this on turn 10 at a full 10 mana, giving up one mana crystal would mean that it's not actually punishing at all. But this makes it really, really bad to cast it before turn 10, because you're giving up a ton of mana crystals. So if you innervate it out or you try to cheat it out, you're getting punished. And it only makes it marginally bad on turn 10, because you'd essentially go back to 8 mana, which means you'd have 9 mana the following turns. You couldn't cast 2 straight Ultimate Infestations or something of the sort, and it would just reduce the amount of plays you could make. You know, you have to decide when it's worth it to give up these 2 mana crystals. It adds some of that ramp risk back into the calculations for Druid, whereas before, you know, before Ultimate Infestation, you had to think about giving up resources for ramp, and now with Ultimate Infestation, it's sort of the opposite. You have to think about giving up ramp for resources, so I think there's a cool little balance there. And yes, again, this would absolutely be a nerf to the card, but that's what it needs, and I think this would be one that pulls it back in line with what Druid is supposed to be and how the ramp mechanic is supposed to work. And then finally, my last suggestion, I think I actually like this one the best. It's a very, very strong nerf to Ultimate Infestation, admittedly, and that's that you'd have to choose to get either the minion or to get the damage. So you don't get both, because right now Ultimate Infestation is kind of just ridiculous in how much it can swing a board. It's a Firelands portal, right? You get to kill something and you get to summon a guy. And Firelands Portal is a really, really strong card in and of itself, but because Ultimate Infestation also draws you 5 cards, I don't think it's fair that you get to make such an immediate and powerful impact on the actual game state and the board itself. So I think that you should have to choose, and of course that fits Druid's mindset and mechanics as well. Choose one is Druid's thing. So you have to either choose, do I want a minion or do I want the damage? So basically, you don't lose the flexibility of Ultimate Infestation. Sometimes if you're behind on the board and you have to use the damage, okay, that's fine. Or you can use the damage to hit the opponent's face, that's fine. Or sometimes if you're super ahead in the game, you can just use the minion and the card draw, and that's still a great play. I mean, that looks like a super Ancient of Lore, and Ancient of Lore was one of Druid's best cards before it got nerfed. So I just think that this, although very punishing to the card, does fit in line better and makes that power level feel a little more acceptable in my eyes. So let's reduce the amount of things they get by 1, and I think these would be the 2 things you'd have to choose between, because nobody would ever take the armor if you put the armor up in the equation. Choosing 5 armor would be useless a vast majority of the time. So I think it has to be between the minion or the damage. You could even make it a choose one of 3 and, you know, give up the card draw too, but I think the card draw is such an important aspect of the card, and where a lot of the value is bundled in, that these 2 choices would be the right choices to make and would be a good change for the card. So there you go. Those are my 5 fixes for Ultimate Infestation. I know some of those are going to be controversial, especially if you're playing a lot of Druid. You probably like how powerful this card is, because I guess you're winning a lot of games on the back of Ultimate Infestation. But for the rest of us who aren't playing a ton of Druid, I do think this card needs an adjustment. And of course, I play a little of everything, guys, so this is not coming from a bitter standpoint or a salty standpoint where I just keep losing to Druid. I think this is going to be best for the game if these changes were to happen. Of course, I don't think Blizzard will actually take any of my advice. They might nerf Ultimate Infestation if it continues to win at this rate. Who knows? It's one of those cards that seems like it could get nerfed, but who knows how they'll do it, and they'll probably do it in a way very, very different from my suggestions. But I do think that these suggestions would be good and be healthy for Hearthstone, and that's what I want. I want a game that's fun and balanced for everybody, so you don't feel like you're pigeonholed into a single class just because they're so dominant in the meta. That's not the Hearthstone I want to see, and that's not the Hearthstone I want for you guys. So that said, if you have any thoughts, comments, questions on this card, how powerful it is, a fix that you'd like to see, a take on my fixes and how terrible and how stupid they were, of course, I'd love to hear those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.